Hey, shalom everybody. Welcome to Translating Hebrew. This is week number 2. If this is your first time watching any Hebrew class, in the translation we're using the tools that we have learned in the beginning, intermediate, and advanced classes, which are on YouTube. So you can find them on YouTube at the Passion For Truth video channel. Just search for Hebrew class with Mark Jacob, or it's called something else now, Learning Biblical Hebrew with Mark Jacob or something. It's got my name, and it has something about learning Hebrew. Okay, so you'll see the whole playlist there. They've got it all kind of together. If you need to go through the letters, start at the beginning. If you already know the letters and vowels, and you can jump right into grammar, intermediate's the place to start. So you can go through those. Notes accompanying all of those classes can be found at the Regathering. I list the links for those in the video. Notes for this class, because there are now notes for Translating Hebrew, can be found at theregathering.com/page/PFT Hebrew 4. And so, yes, I now have the notes. You will notice in the notes, I have actually Genesis, it doesn't have a header at the top, but it is Genesis 1, verses 1 through 5. Today we're going to cover 3 through 5. Last week we did verses 1 and 2. And I've got 2 sets of them. One is a set that just has the letters and the vowel pointings, and also the marking that means end of verse, which is this sort of colon-looking thing here with sort of diamonds instead of dots. That marks the end of a verse in Hebrew text, or in the Hebrew scriptures, I should say, not just any text. So that marks the end of a verse, so that's in there too. The other set has all these extra markings on it, all these little squiggles and things that look like a shava above a letter and all kinds of little things. Those are cantillation marks, and I've included a text with that just so you can see what it looks like. They put them right next to the vowels, and some of them almost look a little bit like vowels, but they're not. They're cantillation marks, and if you read a text that has those marks in it, you'll have to kind of read around them in order to understand the text. So I want to get you a little familiar with that so you don't think there's all these extra vowels I haven't taught you. I have, in fact, taught you every vowel. Those are cantillation marks, and what those do is, in synagogue, the text is, it's not just dryly read, it is canted, it is sung. And so they have a person they actually call the cantor who reads it in this sort of rhythmic, melodic flow. And there's a number of reasons that's done. One is a memory aid, because it's easier to remember something set to music than it is something that's just dryly, monotonously recited. So anyway, those cantillation marks, I don't know how they work because I am not a cantor, but they give guidance to the cantor, voice inflection and notes and that sort of thing. Okay, so I wanted to give you a text that had those in it just so you are familiar with seeing it, but just understand that's not what we're reading. We're not reading those cantillation marks. Okay, so pick the text that's the least distracting for you, and we will proceed. I'm trying something a little different today. Last week I had the whole board filled up with the verse we were going to translate, and that kind of hamstrung me because I didn't have anywhere to write. And so I do need some space to write, so I've done things a little differently now. Hopefully you can see this if you are online, but I've got verse 3 and the first half of verse 4 on here, and then I've got the rest of verse 4 and the first half of verse 5 here, and I'll write the last half of verse 5 when we come to it. So the first thing that we'll do is just pronounce the words so we can get a handle on that, and then we will start interpreting them. So, if you can follow along here, start with Vayomer Elohim Yehi, or Vayehi, or Vayar Elohim Et Haor Ki Tov. Okay? So that is verse 3 and the first half of verse 4. This is all the same stuff on the notes. And the notes are probably a little easier to read, actually. And we'll just proceed just to get the hang of pronouncing this stuff. Vayavdel Elohim. And just a side note, once you recognize words, you don't have to sound them out anymore, just like in English. You see it and you go, Elohim. Don't even have to pay attention to the vowels, right? You do still need to pay attention to the vowels just in case it has a suffix on it, but Elohim, Bain, Ha-or, Uvain, right? Because the bait does not have a dagesh, so we'll say vain, although the difference is quite slight when you're hearing it. Ha-choshech, again, we've got our cholam and then our shin dot, so be aware of that. Sometimes they're combined. Ha-choshech, vayikra, Elohim, lots of Elohim in this Genesis 1. La-or, Yom, V'la-choshech, Kara, Laila. Okay? And then there's the other half of verse 5, but due to space constraints, I will write that down later. Okay? So we're going to start back up in verse 3, which you'll need your notes to refer to. I'm not going to hold this other board up the whole time. There's a couple things you need to know before we jump into verse 3. One is, I mentioned before that the vav, when it is put in front of a verb, will flip the tense of that verb. Okay, so it'll change future tense to past, and it will frequently change past tense to future. It does some other things too, not in terms of interpretation of the verb, but it does things in terms of how the conjugation form of the verb. So there are certain roots that will take different vowels, or will have a kind of an odd-looking conjugation when that vav is placed in front of it. So it's still functioning the same way, but it'll change specific words in specific ways. And unfortunately, I wanted to start in Genesis 1 because that seemed like a great place to start, but it's not the best place for illustrating rules because there are a few words in here that have some special cases attached to them. You saw that in verses 1 and 2, not verse 1 so much, but verse 2 had all these kind of unusual words in it. So, and that evens out a little bit here, but I still need to go over a few peculiarities just to clarify them before we move on. One of those words is the very first word in verse 3. So I've got that word right here, and there's some things we can take away from this right away, not knowing what the root means and anything else. First off, it starts with a vav, so we know that's our prefix and. Okay? Now, the vowels look a little funny, but when we see something that starts with a yod and then has 3 letters, okay, that aren't yods or vavs or heys, right? This looks like, if you look at your binyan pa'al conjugation chart, or for that matter, even binyan pl, it looks like the third person future tense, masculine. Okay, that yod prefix with nothing else looks like a third person future tense masculine. So if you have your notes on that, take a look at that. Now you'll notice that the vowels, though, are different. Okay, we would expect the vowels for this to be this. Okay? Now it can't be this because of the Gizra Pei Aleph, where an Aleph is the first radical, but I haven't gone over that yet. It wouldn't matter if I had, though, because this root, Aleph Mem Resh, has a special conjugation. And it doesn't follow the normal rules of things that have Pei Aleph. At least I don't think it does. Because it doesn't look right to me. But what in fact it does do, this form here, without the vav attached, is the third person masculine singular. Okay? It's just using a cholam vowel here and a segol here. Okay? Yomer. What does this mean? Well, if you go back to the root, Aleph Mem Resh means to say. Okay? Aleph Mem Resh means to say. So Amar right, would mean he said, and yomer means he will say. Okay? So yomer would just be, or it wouldn't actually be yomer. It becomes yomer because of the addition of the vav. The vowels would be different if it was just this. But this vav, as I was mentioning before, can kind of change how these vowels function. So that gets a little confusing in certain cases. Most cases, it's not that confusing. This happens to be one where it is. So I know I'm not explaining this terribly well, but basically the gist of it is these vowels are changing around, but it's still a third-person masculine singular future tense form. Okay? I say future tense because it'd be future tense without the vav, but when we add the vav, it flips the tense, so it becomes past tense. So vayomer, instead of meaning he will say, it flips and means and he said. Okay? And he said. All right, so that's our first word in verse 3, vayomer, and he said. Elohim, so that's the subject. So translated, instead of saying, and he said, God, okay, we'd have the subject first, and God said, okay, and Elohim said. And now I need to take another aside because we have Yehi. Now Yehi, if you remember when I talked about the root Haya, which means to be, or rather Hey Yud Hey means to be. Okay. I mentioned that the future tense form, okay, past tense is Haya, which means he was, third person masculine singular. Past tense is Haya, which means he was. He will be is Yehyeh. Okay, but then there's this other form, Yehi. Now, Yehi is actually the jussive form of that root. Now, what the jussive form does, and for most verbs, the jussive form looks exactly like the future tense form, but it's meant to be understood in a slightly different way. In the case of Haya, there's actually a distinction. The jussive form looks different than the future tense form, so that is an advantage for us, actually. What the jussive form does is it expresses intent or desire, and so jussives are always third-person verbs. And it expresses not that he will be, but that it's intended to be or it is desired to be. So when somebody is saying Yehi, that can be rendered various ways. I want it to be, okay, is a possibility. Let it be or let him be would be probably a good one. Or may it be. Okay, it's not a definite statement. This is going to happen. But it's a statement, it's desired for this to happen. So that's what Yehi means. It is third person, masculine, singular, and it is the jussive future tense. So, let him be, or let it be, or may it be. Okay, these are all potential renderings of Yehi. And another thing to note is that biblical Hebrew has no quotation marks. So when somebody speaks, the usual syntax is vayomer, and he said. Name of subject, be it Elohim or Moshe or whoever. And then following that is an invisible quotation mark. Okay, following that is what they said. But you have to sort of mentally insert those quotation marks at the beginning and at the end to know when they stop speaking, when it resumes talking about what else happened as opposed to what the person is saying. Okay, so Vayomer Elohim, and God said. Now we have an invisible quotation mark, which we don't know until we actually read the whole thing and put it together, but I'm just giving you a heads up that there is one there. Yehi, let it be. Okay, let what be? Or if you recall, it is light. And so the standard translation of this is, let there be light. You could also say, let light be. Let light exist. Okay, let light come to be. All right, any of those things would be possible translations, but the idea is, the gist of it is, God wants light to exist. Okay, that's what he is expressing in this verse. Okay, then after that we have another funny form. It does get better after verse 3. Vayehi. Yes. Now, what this looks like is the jussive tense flipped by the vav. In fact, it's actually the future tense flipped by the vav. When the vav is added to the root hey yud hey, this happens to be what it does to the future tense. So it's not flipping the jussive because you can't flip the jussive. Okay, you can't say, and he wanted it to be. All right, jussive expresses a desire for future happenings, not for past ones. Okay, so again, this is a funny thing pertaining to the root hey yud hey, and that's a funny root because it is both a ayin yod conjugation and a lamed hey conjugation. And when those two combine, they do funny things. Okay, and this is one of them, is that when the vav is added, the hey at the end drops off. Now, incidentally, it also adds a little bit of poetic cadence, I suppose, to Genesis 1. So I don't think it's entirely random that this is the form, because now we can say, Vayomer Elohim yehi or vayehi or. Okay? So, the quotation mark ends after or. All right, begins before yehi and ends after or. So, and God said, let there be light, or let light be. All right, vayehi, and there was, or light. Okay, so let light be and light was, or let there be light and there was light. Okay, put in the theirs or take them out as you desire. Okay, but so there's various ways to render this in English. Okay, we have a little bit of flexibility because English is such a versatile language. Okay, we have multiple ways of expressing the same idea. But the main idea in verse 3 is God said that he wants light to be there, and then there was light. Okay, then light was there. Okay, so he spoke and it was so. Any questions about verse 3? Okay, verse 3 is pretty straightforward once you wade through the exceptions. It gets a little better, a little more straightforward after this. Where's the et? In verse 3? That's a question. There is no et, but there's a good reason that there's not an et. Right, because we have actually 3 sentences here. Vayomer, Elohim is one. All right, well, it's not really 3 sentences, but they're clauses and subclauses. Okay, but anyway, Vayomer is one. Elohim's the subject of Vayomer. And Yehi is another verb, and or is the subject of that verb. Okay. To exist is not a transitive idea. Okay, something doesn't exist to something else. It just exists. It just is. Okay, so he's saying, I want the light to be, not I want the light to, he's not saying I want something else to be the light, so there's no need for an et before or there. And then vayehi or, and light was. So in each case, there's 3 verbs and there's 3 subjects that are attached to those verbs. So we don't actually have any objects. So that's why there is no et in verse 3. Okay? Any other questions? All right. All right, moving on to verse 4, and this is the last funky thing, I promise. Our first word there, vayar. Now this is a funny conjugation that applies to a specific word. Okay, again, we've got our vav prefix, which means and we would expect to have yod and then 3 characters. Okay, yod and then the rest of our root. But we don't. And that's because of the funny conjugation on this particular word. The root of this word is actually resh aleph he, which means to see. Or I'm sorry, yes, it does. It means to see. Okay? The he drops in this particular conjugation. Okay, our third radical is leaving. Now, normally in lamed he, for a future tense, the he does not drop. It stays. Okay? But in this case, it does. For this particular word, it has a special conjugation. This, by the way, both aleph mem resh and resh aleph he are words that you'll encounter all the time in the scriptures. And that's probably why they have a funny conjugation, is just so they can't be confused with anything else. So, so this is, in fact, again, the third person, masculine, singular, future tense form. And then we've got a vav at the beginning, so it flips the future to the past. Okay, so resh aleph he is to see. So yara is future tense. That means he will see. Vayara flips it, and he saw. Okay. Okay. All right, so we've got, Vayara, and he saw. Who saw? Elohim. Elohim's the subject. He's the one doing the seeing. Et ha'or. Now we've got our et, because he's not just seeing, in a general sense. He's seeing something specifically. And what he's seeing is the direct object, et ha'or. He saw the light. Okay, the light that just came into existence in verse number 3. All right, now we've got a funny phrase, which is ki tov. Right. Now, I've talked about ki briefly before. And ki is a causative word. It indicates causation, but you don't know just from looking at it which direction the causation goes. Okay, if it goes from the word before to the word after, so the phrase before causes the phrase after, or if the phrase after caused the phrase before. All right. So ki can be rendered various things. For, that, occasionally because. All right. That and because, of course, are opposite causative phrases. It's either because of what comes after, or this happened in order to cause what comes after. All right. So ki's a little funny like that. Usually context tells you which way it's got to be. Yes, this ki, I don't have anywhere to go with that. So Vayar Elohim et ha'or, so God saw the light, ki tov. Now, what we do know is that we've got an invisible, is, which becomes an invisible was, because we've been speaking in the past tense this whole time. And we know that tov applies to or. See, and that's an interpretation question. Okay? Most translations say, God saw the light, that it was good. Right. And so that's the question, though. Was the light good because God saw it, or did God see the light because it was good? So if you're translating this, you have to decide which of those you want to go with. And unless you're a much better linguist than I am, or you have a lot more context to go on, I'm not sure which way that should go. So, but whatever the case, the light was good. We know that. But we don't know if it was caused to be good by God looking at it, or if God saw it in the first place because it was good. Not sure how that should go. And actually, I'm sure there's, well, I know for a fact that there's rabbinic debate about that. But anyway, we've got this mysterious key in there. Other places, the key is not so difficult to interpret. Just this is one where it really could go either way. You can think about this both ways, and both seem equally legitimate when you're talking about, you know, the pre-existent universe. So it's kind of hard to know which way that should go. All right. Okay. So Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov. Any questions about that phrase, other than what does ki indicate there? All right. We know tov is applying to or. All right. So our next word is vayavdel. Now, it is in fact a verb. And there's some things that, without even knowing the definition of the root, we can derive about this verb. Okay, you say it's in the past tense. Ultimately, you're right. Right. So we've got a vav at the beginning, so we can kind of cut that out and ignore it for the time being. Right? And then we've got our same pattern. We've got our 3 root letters, and we've got our yod prefix. So far, so good. So it's looking like a future tense verb, right? Future tense masculine singular verb. Okay? Now, do we notice anything else about this that tells us anything about the verb? Looks like it's in the PL. Now, how do we know that? It's got a dagesh in our second radical. Remember, the dagesh is our giveaway that this is binyan PL. So, okay, so we've got the dagesh here. We've got the tsera here, which is our characteristic vowel under the second radical. Refer to your PL chart if you need to kind of look at that, and you'll see the third person masculine singular looks like this. Now, what we do have, though, that's different from the PL is we've got a vowel flip. Normally, we should have a, either a chirik or a shva. My memory's failing me right now, under the yod, and then this patach should be under the beit. Okay, yivadel. I think it's a shva, actually. Yeah, yivadel, because the chirik is characteristic of binyan pa'al. Okay, but PL usually has a shva. So yivadel is what we would expect. The reason that these are flipped is actually because we have a vav at the beginning. So that changes the vowels around. Yes. Otherwise, yes, you'd be saying vayivadel, which is harder to say than vayavdel. Okay. That's most of the reason for these seemingly random vowel changes is so you can read it easily. All right. Yeah. Now, so vayavdel. Okay. So we know that this is in. All right. This would be third person, masculine, singular. This is future tense. We know the vav flips it to past. We know all that. And we also know that since it's in binyan PL, that this is an intensive form of whatever verb we're dealing with. We probably know that, unless it's like a special thing. Sometimes the PL has some additional sense other than intensive that it adds to a verb. But we can guess right off the bat that this is an intensified form of action. Okay? So now we know all that without even knowing what the word means, just based on the form, okay, and just based on the rules that we've been learning through intermediate and advanced Hebrew. Okay, and that may not have all come to your head right away, but these are the kinds of things that as you progress, you'll start to see this stuff right away. Ah, okay, that's that form. You don't even have to know the word, is the great thing. Then all you have to do is, if you can identify the root, you just look up the root and find out what the root means. So, theoretically, the paleo could tell you what it means.
When the door goes to the staff, you're separating. If I had goats and I want to separate them, I'd put my staff in the door.
Right. You could think other things from that, though. So the root here is beit dalet lamed. Okay, which means to separate. Okay? So we've got the third person masculine, so he, singular, third person masculine singular indicates he. And we've got past tense, so he separated, and he separated. Right. Elohim, so we have the statement of our subject, the one doing the separating is Elohim. So Vayavdel Elohim. Yes. Bein Haor. We have it up here now. Great. Vayavdel Elohim Bein Haor Uvein HaChoshech. All right. So we know we've got the light. HaChoshech is the darkness. And then we've got these two bains. Bain is a conjunction, and we covered this in the final weeks of Advanced. Bain is a conjunction, which means between. And when we use bain, we'll use it twice. Okay, we'll use it in front of each of the things that we're separating between. We'll usually use it twice. Every once in a while you see it just by itself. But usually it's twice. So we separated literally between the light and between the darkness. But in English we don't say between twice, so we would just say, and God separated between the light and the darkness. Okay? So that's verse 4. The entirety of verse 4. Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov. God saw the light, that it was good, or because it was good. Vayavdel Elohim bein haor uvein hachoshech. And God separated between the light and the darkness. So any questions about verse 4?
I don't want to be anointed by the wall. That sounds painful. We do that to food all the time.
Yeah, I see.
It's a picture of something going in your mouth. Total darkness after that.
Actually, I parsed out choshech one time based on two-letter roots, and I don't remember what it came out to be. I'll have to look that up in my notes sometime. But it's kind of interesting, whatever it was. All right, so on to verse 5, of which I only have the first half up here. And I don't think I need a lot of space to write, so I'm going to go ahead and write out the rest of verse 5 up here, just so we've got it. But in the meantime, verse 5 says, Vayikra. Vayikra. Okay, so again, we're starting to notice a pattern here, right? We've got verbs that start with Vav, and then we've also got a Yod, and then we've got our three-letter prefix. Why all the similarity of verb form? Because there's one subject throughout this entire narrative. All right, Elohim is the subject time and time and time again. And since Elohim is third person masculine and singular, we're going to keep encountering third person masculine singular verbs that describe his actions. Okay? So pretty, it's this added layer with all these people and genders and numbers and things that we don't have so much of in English. We do have number in English, but we don't think about it. But it all kind of comes together once because the narratives aren't helter-skelter, they're talking about one specific thing. And so, you start to see these patterns and start to become comfortable with them, and it kind of flows. All right? So again, we've got Vayikra. Vav is and. Yikra is a third-person masculine singular future tense verb. Kuf Resh Aleph, I believe I covered that in a past class, but it means to call. Okay? So Vayikra would be and he called, again, because Yikra would be he will call, and Vav flips the tense. Yes, incidentally, Vayikra is the name. I didn't mention that, I don't believe, in last week. Maybe I did. A lot of the Hebrew books, meaning the books of Scripture, are named after one of the first few words in the book. So their names are different, when you translate them than the names that we have in English. Now, Genesis means beginning, and so that's an approximation of Bereshit, which is the name of the book we call Genesis in the Hebrew. But Exodus, the English name, is based on kind of the main story of the book, which is the departure from Egypt. But in the Hebrew, it's called Shemot, because the first word in Exodus, or one of the first words in Exodus is Shemot, which means names. It starts by listing a list of names. Okay, so that's how that's listed. Vayikra, this is just an aside, by the way. This has nothing to do with translating this verse. Vayikra, incidentally, is the first word in what we call Leviticus, but it means "and he called." And so, yeah, this is a word, a specific form of a word that you'll see repeatedly as well, in addition to Vayomer and Vayar, which means to see. Okay, Vayikra, and he called, you'll see frequently as well. This is the first instance of its usage. Okay, so Vayikra, and he called. Elohim, again, our subject, the one doing the calling. La or. Okay, we recognize or as light. We've got a lamed prefix, and it's got a comets vowel underneath it. So we know that he called to the light. That's right. We're taking the vowel from the definite article and the lamed from the prepositional prefix, which means to or for. Okay, so God called to the light. And now we have an invisible quotation mark. Yom. Yom is day, right? So God called to the light. Properly translated, we would just say he called the light day. But what it's saying here is he's giving it a name, ultimately. Okay, so that's why we have this lamed prefix. He's attaching something to the light. All right, he's not transitively calling it. All right, but he's attaching something to it, and what he's attaching is this term Yom. Okay, so Elohim called to the light Yom, which is day. And La Choshech. Now Choshech is darkness. La Choshech would be to the darkness. And then we've got our Vav prefix before that. So we've got two prefixes here. Actually 3, because the definite article is also in there, just in vowel form. Okay. Yes, it is a patach because the definite article before a chet just takes a normal patach. But it's a comets here because the definite article before an aleph takes a comets. Aleph, ayin, and resh are the 3. But for some reason, the chet is not one of them, even though the chet doesn't take a dagesh. That is one of the great mysteries of Hebrew grammar. To me. Okay, but v'la choshech, okay, and to the darkness, kara. All right, this is Vayikra is and he called, because it is the third person, masculine, singular, future tense, flipped by the vav. So it changes from he will call to he called. Kara is the third person, masculine, singular, past tense, with no flipping. Okay, so it means the same thing as Vayikra, except there's no and in front of it. Right. So Vayikra Elohim, so and God called to the light day, and to the darkness, Kara, he called. Our subject is still the same, it's still Elohim. And now we have another few invisible quotation marks. Okay, Laila, which means night. So we called the light day, and he called the darkness night. Lila is a pretty name. Yom, you probably wouldn't name your kid that. Although there are more, in Hebrew, that there are some sort of harsh pronunciations that do become names. So, yeah, Ruth sounds okay in English, but in Hebrew it's Ruth. And that sounds kind of, just...
I just stubbed my toe on
It doesn't sound really feminine or really... doesn't flow really well. It's kind of harsh and stopped, and it's like a German name or something. Even German flows a little better than that because it has at least a few syllables in it. But anyway, so yeah, it's kind of funny how that works. Although darkness isn't called bad. I mean, it could be insinuated just because the light was good and darkness is the opposite, and there was this strong separation made between the light and the darkness. Maybe there's something theologically to take away from that. Okay, just because it sounds good doesn't mean it is. But I don't know. Take from that what you will. But the translation is that God called to the light day. So he's giving the light a name, calling it Yom. And to the darkness he called Lila. All right, and then we have the second half of verse 5.
It's a hint that not always what's good is going to look good, and never always is bad.
Walk by faith, not by sight, perhaps. All right, so quickly, I'll put the rest of verse 5 up here. All right, so this is the last half of verse 5. So we'll read it real quick. Vayehi erev, vayehi boker, or voker actually. Yom, sorry about my sloppy writing, Yom echad. Okay? So, vayehi, I just explained what that is. And it was, or and he was. Okay? So now what was? Erev, which is evening. Yep, Erev is evening. Sundown is a good translation for some cases. Here, not so much, because there's no sun until day 4. So, that is an excellent question, actually. Where does these evenings and mornings come from when there's no sun until day 4? Why is there day and night? Okay, so these are all...
Was the earth spinning?
Yes, these are all valid questions, and ones that I can't answer, and ones that the text doesn't answer either, on its own. Okay, so Vayehi Erev, okay, so there was evening. Vayehi Voker, okay, Boker is morning. Okay, so evening was, and morning was. Yom is day, as we just mentioned. Yom Echad. Okay, Echad is the number 1. And so here it's being used in the adjective form. It's following Yom. Yom is masculine, so Echad is masculine, right? So the proper translation would be 1 day. Now, most translations will say the first day. I don't believe that that is the best way to translate it. Now, right, it should be Yom Rishon if it's the first day, for one. Second of all, now there's a reason they translate it first day. These are all Hebrew scholars that are translating these things. They know that Echad means 1 and that Rishon means first, okay? They're not just, you're not just having a brain meltdown here. When you look at the rest of Genesis 1, okay, the other days are listed with not cardinal but ordinal numbers attached to them. Okay, so it says Yom Sheni, 2nd day. Yom Shlishi, the 3rd day. Yom Revi'i, 4th day. Interestingly, the definite article is not used with day until day 6. Okay, all right. So day 6 is Hayom Hashishi. Or I think it's just Yom Hashishi because it's a... but anyway, so the definite article isn't used until day 6. Now, in English, it doesn't make any sense to say a second day, a third day, a fourth day. We would say the second day, the third day, the fourth day. There's only one of them. There's not like a general second day. Yeah, I had that second day and that second day, and no, it's a specific period of time. So in English, we render it specifically, but the Hebrew doesn't actually have the definite article, and it's not just meant to be implied because it does use the definite article on day 6. So if you see, there are some translations that actually stick to that, even though it doesn't make sense in English. They will say a second day, a third day, and there's some translations that will say one day at the end of day 1. Most of them, though, will say the first day, the second day, the third day, because that makes sense in English, and it makes sense as a following of the narrative. Okay. There's a legitimate reason to do that. There's a very legitimate reason to just translate this the first day and not worry about, the peculiarities of the Hebrew right here, because as a flow of the story, it makes more sense to be that way. But in the Hebrew, it doesn't say that, and they could have said that. They could have said Yom Rishon. They could have said Ha-Yom Ha-Rishon, the first day, and left no question. And there's nothing at all that prevents them from doing that. But they didn't. So I'm inclined to think that there's a reason they didn't. And so much as I like readability in a text, I would push for preserving that quirk in the English translation. Mm-hmm. Because what that would do, anybody reading the Hebrew is going to have a question right here. Why does it say one day instead of the first day? And then they'll go down to verse, talking about the second day. Why does it say a second day instead of the second day?
Why does it say the 6th day?
Yeah, and then it says the 6th day. It's in that way. It's in there that way for a reason. Okay, this isn't an accident. It's meant to make you ask questions, just like the bait in Bereshit having a shva underneath it instead of a comets. Okay, there's a glaring absence of a definite article there. All right, and I'm not going to try to interpret that per se, but the point I'm making is it's there and it's meant to make you ask questions. All right.
After Vayahi, you've got voker instead of voker.
Yes.
So it's a bait instead of a bait.
It's still a bait. It just doesn't have a dagish. Thanks.
Okay, it's a bait without dagish. Why does it not have? Why does it not have a dagish? It's standing there on its own. It's not attached to.
Yes.
Vayahi. So why not?
Why no dagish? I'm not sure. I know part of the reason is because the word right in front of it ends with a vowel sound. However, I've seen where the word in front of a word ends with a vowel sound and there's still a dagish in the word, the first letter of the word that comes after. So, I don't know. But yes, you're right. The dagish would usually be there, and here it's not. So it still means the same thing. It's the exact same word. And but I know it has something to do with this vowel sound in front. But then there's exceptions where...
Maybe because it's got a hyphen actually between the two.
Well, yeah, that's another thing I was going to mention too, is on your sheet, you'll notice this sort of hyphen character. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, because I did mean to bring that up. I've never taught what that is, and you won't find that in all Hebrew texts. But that is basically a sort of a piece of Hebrew punctuation. And what it means exactly, it means that the two words it's between are connected to each other very closely. You'll find it frequently between a word that's in the construct state and then the word that comes after it. Okay, so yes, between et and the direct object, you'll find that. Yes, and also between pronominal suffixes and then the, whatever they're describing. So anyway, it's just a way of reinforcing a connection between two words. You'll find it in some texts. You won't find it in all. So anyway, it's not a hyphen. It's not hyphenating anything. It's demonstrating a connection between two words. It is not a vowel marking. It is not a letter. It's not something you need to worry much about. Okay, but that is what it's there for. So I did. Yes, it was just pointed out that in my non-cantillation Hebrew text, there is a cantillation mark under Erev. There's a little loop-de-loop thing here, which I failed to erase in my paint program. So, I'm low-tech. I am cheap and low-tech, yes. But so anyway, all told, we've got Vayikra Elohim Laor Yom V'lachoshech Kara Laila. So God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. Vayihi Erev Vayihi Boker Yom Echad. Right, and there. Now we say, and there was evening, and there was morning. We could say, so there was evening, and there was morning. That would seem to follow from Him distinguishing between light and darkness. All right, so therefore, there's evening and morning. All right, but and is acceptable too. It's all a matter of how you kind of sense the flow of the narrative, which specific words you use to translate the vavs and all that kind of thing. But you can see here, though, what I really wanted to point out is that all the rules and all the things we've learned so far are working in this stuff. Okay, we've got our verb and then our subject. They're matching in gender. They're matching in number. All right, we can identify our tenses, future or past. We can identify our persons, our numbers, our genders, and our verbs. And we've got our subjects, our direct objects with the et in front of them. Okay, and we've got adjectives, yom echad. Okay, we've got tov earlier, though it's not used really in an adjective, not like a normal adjective. It is an adjective there, but it's not. We're not saying or tov, good light, but we're calling the light good. All right. So anyway, all these rules that we've gone through for the past 32 weeks of 32 lessons of Hebrew, finally coming together in translating the verse. And so anyway, that any questions about verse 5 or about the anything prior to that? Okay. All right. All right. So next week we're actually going to jump somewhere else. I don't remember where, but it would be nice to continue on in Genesis. But because of some of these peculiarities, I don't want to kind of slog through it too much more. I'd rather go on things where you can have a little more confidence in what you're reading. But they'll be interesting nonetheless. So I don't remember what I have on the agenda for next week, but we'll kind of fill in whatever little gaps have been left off from the previous classes as we go. And we shouldn't have too many more exceptions to the rules we already know, so we should be able to just read this stuff for what it is. And that'll be nice. So again, just to reiterate, you don't have every tool you need to translate the entire Hebrew Scriptures at this point. But you do have enough to get the gist of a lot of them. And you do have enough, to where if you just learn a couple little things, you can get the entirety of things like Genesis 1 through 5. Okay? Now, that's a rough one, actually, compared to a number of others. So, anyway, this is the point I was hoping to get to, and I hope you're all enjoying it, learning a lot, and kind of comprehending things. I know we're moving through it quick, but that's why it's recorded, and you've got the notes. And so anyway, keep at it, and we'll see you again next week. So shalom.